So that the kids in the classroom can see this number, I'm going to turn the podium once and then I'll turn it back. The number here is 525,600. 525,600 minutes, to be exact. That's how many minutes are in 1 year. 525,600 minutes. We are about to hit a landmark that probably hasn't occurred to you yet. Next Friday, we're going to have an all-school worship in the gym. And how we're going to do it, I'm not exactly sure. Who's going to be on the praise team, I'm not exactly sure. But we want to get all together because we haven't been together as a school family for about 1 year. You might remember what that assembly was, and it wasn't the whole school. I think it was just middle school and high school. 1 year ago, next Friday, we all met in the chapel because it was our last day of school. We were told by the governor on March 13th that we were going to take a 3-week shutdown. I showed a video in the chapel because there was a new term we were using that none of us had ever heard of before, and it's, to be honest, become a bit meaningless in the past year, but the term was flattening the curve. Do you remember that? We were going to take 3 weeks off to flatten the curve, and that 3 weeks turned into another 3 weeks, and another 3 weeks, and then it was 3 months, and graduation outside, and an odd summer, and let's face it, kind of an odd year, an odd school year. That all started 513,000 minutes ago, because we haven't quite had a full year. So we're going to do some time travel this morning. I don't know if you've ever seen the movie Back to the Future. It's an old movie. Your parents probably know it better than you do, but there's a young actor in there named, what was his name? Michael J. Fox. That's it, Michael J. Fox. And he was wearing a puffy vest in that movie. So I thought I'd wear my Back to the Future vest today because we're going to be doing some time travel in minutes. In fact, we're going to go back more than 30 million minutes to the date of November 22nd, 1963. You weren't alive. Your parents probably weren't alive. Your grandparents probably were. Not only was I alive, I was not terribly young. I was 7 years old. I was in second grade. I was in Mrs. Schoen's second grade classroom. And about 1:30 Michigan time, we went out for recess. It was just a regular recess, climbing the monkey bars, playing on the swings, and then the lady blew the whistle and we all lined up at the back door, but something was different. Normally we were all chatterboxes and all excited because we only had about another hour left of school. But this time as we entered the hallways, it was very, very quiet. And the teachers were very serious, like we were all in trouble. Some of them were crying, so I knew we weren't in trouble. Mrs. Schoen was standing at the door, as she always did, as we filed into the room, and she said, "Heads on your desk, no talking." And I don't know if you remember when you were little, heads on your desk was sometimes what teachers did to let you cool down after recess. But this was different because the room wasn't quiet. The PA system, this wooden box on the wall, was playing a radio broadcast. And over the radio broadcast was a famous newscaster of the time telling the whole nation about something. And these little 7-year-olds in my second grade class, we were having a hard time putting it all together. And finally I heard a word that I had never heard yet at age 7. The word was assassination. And John F. Kennedy was in Dallas that day. And if you can imagine the President of the United States driving through a downtown area in a convertible with no bulletproof shield around him. This was 1963. It was a different time. And there's been all kinds of conspiracy theories, and I'm not going to get into that. But while we were out to recess that day, President Kennedy was shot in the head. If you go to the next picture, you don't see President Kennedy because he slumped over. The lady in pink is Jacqueline Kennedy, the first lady. She's climbing out on the back of the convertible. And what she was reaching for on the back of that convertible was a fragment of the president's skull, because his head kind of blew up and a part of the bones went to the back. And in the state of shock that she was in, she thought, oh, we'll need that piece because we're going to put it back together and things are going to be right. Of course, they weren't. Kennedy was dead. Lyndon Baines Johnson became president. We called him LBJ. And school was not canceled immediately, but the rest of the week school was canceled. And all across the country, we watched on little black and white TVs, we watched the president's funeral. And I remember it because John Kennedy, his son, was about 3 or 4 years old. And when the casket left from I believe it was the Capitol, to Arlington Cemetery, John was told to salute the casket, and it's a memorable picture that you've seen. So that was when I was in second grade. And this time travel that we're doing this morning is going to be a collection of a few moments that happened when I was at school. Now, lots of bad things happened in my life, lots of sad and memorable things. But I'm not going to talk about the things that happened on weekends, the things that happened over the summer. I'm only going to talk about those moments that are frozen in time that happened when I was at school. You all have had experiences, talk to your grandparents, they have experiences, that they remember the exact place and time they were when they heard the news. So I'm talking about 4 events. First one, I was a student in second grade. All the rest, I was a teacher. So we need to fast forward 9 million minutes to March 30, 1981. Mrs. Kapanka and I were married in 1980. I was a teacher at a college in South Carolina. I taught speech classes. And it was a Monday, and I had just finished one of my morning speech classes, and I was stepping out into the hallway, and another teacher came up to me and said, "Did you hear the news? President Reagan was shot." Now that, when you hear about a president getting shot, it's always going to catch your attention, but that was a big deal to me because I had worked locally for the Reagan campaign. He had come to visit that campus. He's the first president that I saw in person. I met his wife. I had Nancy Reagan's autograph. I worked on a Get Out the Vote campaign. So I was really connected to that president, and he was shot. Was he dead? We don't know yet. They've taken him to a hospital. Believe it or not, at that moment in that picture, he has a bullet about a half an inch from his heart. He was coming out of a building, the one behind him. He had just had breakfast. A guy named John Hinckley took out a .22 caliber pistol, not a terribly powerful gun, and shot him, fired another shot, trying to hit him, but the Secret Service men by that time had pushed him into the car, so the second bullet missed him and hit a guy named Jim Brady in the head. We didn't know his condition. And this story turned out a little bit differently. You might have heard, though you weren't alive at the time, about President Reagan's sense of humor. And he supposedly was making jokes to cheer up the nation. The surgeons that worked on him, he said, I hope you're all Republicans. Of course, that was a headline. We don't even know if that's true, but this was the spin they were putting on this assassination attempt. So let's fast forward 2.5 million minutes, because not only did Reagan survive that assassination attempt, he was reelected. Huge numbers. In the first election, Reagan only lost one state, Minnesota, which was the home state of his opponent. He won 49 states. In his re-election, it was almost that big. He was an incredibly popular president as far as the Electoral College is concerned. So in his second term, by that time, Mrs. Kapank and I had moved to Waterloo, Iowa. I was teaching in a school very much like Calvary, about the same size, a little bit bigger. And I used to teach English. I had basically Mr. Fout's position at that time. And my students, my seniors, that's the class in the cafeteria today, I had you guys write journals. Every week you had this little hardbound book, and you had to write 3 entries, and I really didn't care what you wrote about. It's something that happened that week. And it was a good exercise. It's not quite a diary. Diaries are not meant to be read by others. Journals are intended to be read as a record by other people. So this day was going to be special because for months we had been hearing about a very special event. And back then, some schools had televisions in their rooms. And all across the nation, teachers were encouraged to have their kids watch this special event because this special event included a teacher. For the first time in history, NASA was sending a teacher into space. Her name is Krista McCullough. If you can go to that picture, she's the lady on the left. She taught social studies in Concord High School in New Hampshire. So she was a teacher of students just like you. And all across the country, teachers had entered into a contest. I want to be, pick me, I want to be the one that goes to space. Well, she won. So we watched for months her being trained as an astronaut, but she was just an ordinary teacher. And that day, she was going, I think it was on the 16th Space Shuttle launch with this crew. The next picture, she's on the left. That's the whole crew. The others are all real astronauts. She was a teacher, and she was going to teach, later that day, she was going to teach a lesson, a history lesson from space. It was going to be historic. So as I was collecting the journals, we were watching this footage.
Liftoff of the 25th Space Shuttle mission, and it clears the tower.
Now we had all watched space shuttles take off. This was almost boring. It was routine because we'd watched this many times.
So the 25th Space Shuttle mission is now on the way after more delays than NASA cares to count. This morning it looked as though they were not going to be able to get off.
15 seconds, velocity 2,900 feet per second, altitude 9 nautical miles, downrange distance 7 nautical miles.
We're not sure if that's normal or not. We'd never seen it before, but the news people and NASA wasn't saying anything.
Solid rocket boosters blew away from the side of the shuttle in an explosion.
Flight controllers here looking very carefully at the situation. Obviously a major malfunction.
So we continued to watch after that statement, a major malfunction, and even though they were just seniors in high school, they had seen enough. I said the 15th, it was the 25th launch of a space shuttle. I think there was 2 or 3 of them. And that wasn't normal. And even the seniors were saying, that's not right. Something's wrong. And I was trying to be hopeful. I said, I think that big thing that held the fuel, I think that just separated. Because we couldn't believe what we were about to find out. And as we continued to watch, the cameras were showing the people, the relatives of all the astronauts, the relatives, the family of Krista McCullough, the teacher, in the bleachers at the launch pad in disbelief. And it took several minutes for us to realize what had happened, but every crew member was instantly dead. I don't even think bodies were recovered. Parts of the spacecraft were recovered later in the ocean and on the beach, but I don't think they found any parts of them. So the class was about as quiet as we are right now. And I still had their journals on my desk. So I had them organized by rows, and I just went back and undid what I did and passed back the journals and said, if you feel like it, write about this. Write about what you just saw. Because someday you'll realize that this was a very historic moment. Later that day, I was interviewed by the newspaper, and because they called all the teachers, were you watching that when it happened? How did you handle it? And I told them what we did. And years later, I have had students from that class contact me once social media made that possible. And we talk about things they remember, and they remember that day. And they remember that journal entry that they wrote that day. So let's fast forward about 8 million minutes. In the year 2000, we stayed at that school for 18 years. It was a really good school, a good experience, but for different reasons we felt it was maybe time to look at another school. And that was hard because I had a daughter in 10th grade, daughter in 7th grade, and Natalie, who some of you may know, was just entering kindergarten. And that was home. All our children were born in Iowa. But in the year 2000, 4th of July weekend, we moved from Waterloo, Iowa, to West Michigan to take this job. And that was more than 20 years ago. And I did this calculation because it's very hard to believe. That was 69,000 days ago that I have been in this position at Calvary. I had just started my second year here. The date was October 11, 2001. And it was a regular day. Second hour had just started. It was about this time of day. I was in the office with a missionary from Africa who was talking to me about trying to get a student from Togo, West Africa, named Ajovi, to be our first international student to this school. Now, we've had dozens and dozens of international students, Enoch and many, many others. But at that time, we had never had one international student. What happened while we were in that conversation is Mrs. Lehan knocked on the door and said, Mr. Kapanka, a parent just called, and I guess a plane crashed into the World Trade Center. And I said, a plane? Like what kind of plane? I don't know. Like a little 2-passenger plane? I don't know. Oh, okay, well, thank you. And we went on talking about Ajovi because, to be honest, that was just a fluke. Didn't seem like anything. 10 minutes later, she knocks on the door again and says, a second plane just crashed into the second World Trade Center tower, and they're not small planes, they're commercial aircraft. At that moment, our conversation ended because it was clear that this wasn't some tourist plane or some little accident. This was a major event, an act of terror. And unlike our school in Iowa, we did not have televisions in this building. We really still don't in the true sense of being able to turn on live television right now. We didn't have, we had internet, but there wasn't the kind of live streaming of TV events like you had right now. There were no smartphones. The iPhone was 7 years from being invented. We had no way of what we could all probably do right now if a major event happened. We could all be watching it within minutes. There's no way to do that. So do you guys remember those carts that we had with the TVs on them and the VCR? That's what we had about 4 of those in the building. So I rolled one down to the elevator. We went up to the balcony, and there was a music pastor upstairs named Phil Rice, and he could MacGyver anything to make it work. And we rolled it over to the sound system. He was what Mr. Langdon is now. Back then, if Mr. Langdon had been here, he would have been the guy to figure this out. So somehow, we figured out a way to get live TV on this television that only used VCR tapes. So somehow we get some footage to try to see what's going on. We get a live broadcast, and by that time we were watching what we're going to see here. Thanks, Braden. At this time, there's still a lot of hope. That looked like the way you see deliberate demolitions of buildings. We were not expecting that at all.
Yes. I heard the chief of the department yell, "The tower has come down. The tower has come down."
About 5 pastors and 3 or 4 teachers were up on that balcony right outside the door that's now the art room. And we were watching this grainy picture. And to be honest, we're wiping our eyes. We couldn't believe it. And while we're watching that, the seniors, the whole high school, everybody's just in class, just like nothing, because they don't know anything. It's not like now. If that happened now, you guys you'd all know it within minutes because you'd know on your cell phone. That wasn't happening. So we had to decide, how do we tell the students about this? We decided not to tell the elementary hall, which you guys remember because we just did this change last year. The elementary hall was your hallway. We decided to not tell them because it was just too traumatic, and to be honest, even though we had a whole day of school, we could go through the day like nothing happened on that hall, but we didn't feel it would be right to not tell the older students because they'd wonder, why didn't I know about this? You know that wasn't the only event. The Pentagon also had a jet hit them. Another jet that we assume was headed for either the White House or the Capitol building went down in a field in Pennsylvania. This was a major terrorist attack, and nothing like that had ever happened before. So we decided to wait till 2:30 to have an assembly, but because of the age and the maturity, we went ahead and told the students what was going on, but they hadn't seen the images at all. We went to the gym because it was the only place that we had rigged up this system to broadcast onto the screens in the gym. So the high school and middle school are sitting in the bleachers, and we watched that footage, and they're stunned. We did not cancel school the next day, but we did cancel that night's events. We had a soccer game that night and a girls' volleyball game that night. Those were canceled. Everybody was in shock. Parents throughout the day were coming to get their kids just because they wanted everybody home. It was a major, major tragic event. And in the weeks to follow, the stock market took a dive. The economy went down. We entered into the Iraq war, which it feels like we're still sort of in because we're still pulling home troops from that part of the world. All of that happened and started happening on 9/11. If you have flown commercial, you've gone through security, you know what it's like. Take off the shoe, take off the belt, stand in the metal detector, all that stuff. None of that happened before 9/11. There was security. They would ask you if you had a gun. Nope, go on. It was nothing like this. So, that was almost 20 years ago. Let's fast forward to the present. As I said, next Friday marks 1 full year since we got the news about the COVID-19 pandemic. And I wanted to put some perspective on the things that have happened to me while in school and take you back a year to the chapel. We were all lighthearted. Ironically, we were all packed shoulder to shoulder in the chapel to tell you about this pandemic, which one of the most immediate things was social distancing, which we're still doing right now in this chapel. But we didn't know any of that at the time. And there'll be a time that we smile about all of this. I wanted to give you some perspective because of all those things that have happened and that have interrupted my day as a teacher or an administrator. This is the hardest. What we've been through this year is harder than any of those things. I know I never got sick. Some of you have. I never lost a loved one to COVID. Some of you have. But Mrs. Kapenka and I did go through something during that time that made it extra hard. Yesterday, I celebrated my grandson's 1-year birthday. 525,600 minutes for him happened yesterday. We celebrated as a family on Saturday. He was born the week before that chapel announcement. But he wasn't just born like any normal kid, and we knew that because he has what we call a hyperplastic heart. The left side of his heart is almost non-existent. It's missing. And 20 years ago, he would have been born. He would have been what they call a blue baby. He would have turned blue for lack of oxygen, and he would have died within hours. Now they can detect that, and they have all kinds of ways to keep such a baby alive, to face open heart surgery. And little Liam, we were there at DeVos Children's Hospital the day he was born. We went back a day or two later to see him, even though he had this condition. And then we were told, you cannot come back because you can't be in the hospital. The hospital turned from a busy place when the day he was born to a ghost town. But my daughter and son-in-law had no choice. They had to be there. For about a week, they both stayed there, and then it was turned into only one at a time. And for the next few weeks and months, our grandson was having open heart surgery with only one parent allowed in the hospital, and we couldn't be there to help him. On 3 different occasions, I was asked as the grandfather, I was asked by my son-in-law privately in a very, very heart-wrenching meeting if I would prepare the funeral for Liam, because he just wasn't emotionally up to it. He couldn't focus on that. On 3 different occasions, every time he went into surgery, I had to call a friend who's a funeral director and be ready to conduct what's typically a very fast funeral for a newborn. In each case, the surgeries were good. And this past week, we celebrated Liam's birthday. It was a joyous birthday celebration, but there were also a lot of tears because we were not certain that day would ever happen. But I wanted to walk you through those moments, and I wanted to be transparent with you about why this year has been so difficult. It was also difficult because, unlike all those other historic events where there was nothing that we could do about it, in this case there was something we could do about it. And there's a lot of people that worked hard and donated. We raised $68,000 in the month of August to make this school year possible. The pavilions, the relocation of the rooms, all the stuff that in some ways has been a pain to you guys was not cheap. It was not easy. It was a lot of manual labor. But it made this year possible. And I just want to thank you for the way that you guys have taken heart. And there have been frustration days, I know, but we've only got, for the seniors, we've only got 3 more months and then graduation. And I just want to thank you for the most part, the team spirit you've all demonstrated. Let's close in prayer. Oh, there's the picture. There's Liam. That's a balloon around his head, but it looks like a halo. Thank you, Braden. All right, let's pray. Lord, we know that you never leave us alone, and that with you we can have the courage to take heart. And we know for these young people, this year will someday be a distant memory, just as these distant memories I've shared have been for me. And through it all, you never leave us alone. And there's another in the fire, as we sang this morning. And we thank you for that, and we ask that you would give us courage and confidence and a cooperative spirit as we continue to go through protocols that sometimes are just frustrating. And we pray this all in your name. Amen. Sorry I made you late for your next class.
We don't.